The Nordic welfare model has captured global attention, with many scholars describing it as a role model for equality and economic opportunity. It has resulted in high living standards and low income disparity. But this model is increasingly coming under pressure, with the Nordic countries facing a range of challenges, including growing inequality. Today, I will discuss the challenges that the Danish welfare state is facing and what those mean for its future, as I am joined by Mr. Mogens Lykketoft, a veteran Danish politician and former Speaker of the Danish Parliament. He had been an MP in the Danish Parliament for many years. Besides, he was the president of the 70th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Mr. Mogens, welcome to the podcast and thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, thanks. So I want to start with inequality, and I live in a very unequal country of the world. So I know it's like a cancer. So if you have big inequality between the rich and the poor, it actually has very negative social outcomes. So I want to start with the inequality thing. We know that the Nordic welfare model has been successful in keeping inequality low for a very long time, but it is weakening in recent years. For example, income inequality as measured by a Gini coefficient has risen in Denmark over the years, reaching the highest level in 2021. So this is my question. Why is inequality rising in Denmark?
It has to do with more global phenomenon of neoliberal policy being pursued for 40 years in the Western world. The opening of capital markets, the huge increase in that kind of cancer, which is tax havens and tax evasion. It also has to do, of course, with specific political decisions, normally from center-right governments over the past 25 years, nearly in Denmark, where we have seen and pretty big reduction in marginal taxes at the higher incomes levels, which means that the very progressive income taxation system we had to finance high levels of public expenditure on education and health and childcare and elderly care and so on and forth. That progressive scale of taxation has been attacked from a political majority over at least 20 years, which means that not only have the richest people and the richest company evaded taxation to a rather huge extent, as it happens each and everywhere in the Western world nowadays, but also the formal taxation scale has been changed. Has been changed so that it's much more favorable than before for middle income and particularly high income recipients. And then you have, of course, also a more global tendency of larger increase in the gross incomes of leaders in companies, CEOs in companies. That has been the general tendency of American and European development, that when it was maybe 50 times a worker's pay, is now maybe 500 times a worker's pay in some of the biggest companies. All these factors are involved, some international, some local, where you can say that the social democratic parties in Denmark and Sweden in particular have been weakened very much compared with the 1990s. And that means that we have had more center-right governments than we used to have.
Also, in your book, the Danish model that you wrote many years ago, you say Denmark is still one of the countries with least inequality, but the overall result of the 7 or 8 years of center-right government is that inequalities have increased. And also in the same book, you said in the same chapter, there are serious threats against the Danish model. So my question is this: as a veteran Danish politician who has held many important positions in the government over the years, how do you personally feel about the rise in inequality in your country?
I feel very sad about it because, I mean, as you also said in your presentation, social stability depends very much on a fair, not so unequal distribution of wealth and income. And what has happened is that in my view, bad and wrong idea that you can only get rich people to work and invest if they get tax reductions, and you can only get poor people to work if you reduce the transfer income for them, which has also happened in Denmark. There's been a certain amount of reduction over the years in the rights for unemployment benefits and social welfare benefits. And that, of course, has also contributed to a more unequal and more unjust distribution. So I think there is a very strong need locally in Denmark, but also globally, to begin fighting against the increasing inequality we are seeing each and everywhere. And the first real step to do that is to take out the accelerator of tax evasion, of global tax evasion. It's a little good sign that President Biden has supported a minimum company taxation of 15% between the rich countries. And there has been some efforts in the European Union to go up from the whole community against tax havens. But that's a very slow-going process. I mean, there's also tax havens within the European Union. We may know that in Luxembourg and elsewhere. So, but just to say, in order to put at least some stop on the ever-increasing inequality, there has to be an amount of international action, because it's an international phenomenon which has been in many countries, also in Denmark, strengthened by deliberate efforts from central right governments to lower taxation of very rich people. But having said all this, which makes me sad, it's still a fact that Denmark is one of the less unequal countries. But it's a position. Maybe it's also a position under attack. But anyway, it's a result of everybody being more unequal that we still maintain a relatively good position in international comparison.
Exactly, you're right. I understand, and I totally agree with you. So this is my next question. A recent study has found that despite generous universal social policies, there is substantial inequality in child outcomes across social and economic classes in Denmark. The researchers found that more advantaged families are better able to access and utilize social programs. Do you think this indicates that the Danish welfare policies that promise to give everyone an equal chance to succeed in life are not working anymore?
So I think it is working to a certain extent, and it could be changed to work even more efficient in spite of all the international tendencies working against the idea of equality. And it's also, maybe that's what you're saying, a problem that social mobility is not that big any longer. There is some of the newest analysis I saw actually this week from the economic board of the labor movement, where I used to work when I was young, saying that, well, there's been a small reduction in children's poverty since the peak in the around 2020. Small reduction, but much more should be done, particularly with this problem, because we know that long-time poverty for children will define their life at a much lower income than average and much less education than the average in society. I think we know that from each and every society, but we are a rich country that could do much more to avoid that we have maybe 50,000 children living under what we would call the minimum, the relatively defined minimum income we used to maintain.
There have been cuts in various Danish welfare services in the past decade. As a result, state hospitals and schools have been closed. The proportion of the population taking private health insurance has risen, while elderly care spending has dropped. Considering all this, do you think the Danish welfare model is at risk of collapse and the future generations may no longer be able to say that they live in a welfare state?
I think so. I think that we are strong forces trying to fight against that tendency. It's not that you have a huge reduction in spending on health and education, but there are problems which has to do with the recruitment, the problem with recruitment of people to work in health service and education. So it has to do with that. Was a point of discussion in the election campaign we had this autumn. You have to increase wages for some of the public service workers in order to maintain the quality of the services. You will also be you will also have to invite more from other parts of the world. That's not necessarily a help to the rest of the world, but we can do that, and we do that. And I would say, in spite of the discussion of problems with immigration we are having all the time, especially from the right, but in spite of that, it is a fact that the Danish health system, from doctors at the top to social assistants at the bottom, cleaning personnel, would not at all be able to work without immigrant workers. That's a fact of life in Denmark, and I think in many other places in Europe. So it's not a discussion about saying, should we ask more from other countries to come to help maintain our welfare system. We are doing it right now, and we may need to do even more of that.
Now I want to talk about happiness. You know, the Nordic countries regularly rank among the world's happiest countries, especially in the World Happiness Report, which is released by the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network. Before I talk about happiness and the ranking, I want to ask you this question. Are you a happy person?
If I'm a happy person, yeah, I think so. I have been living for 77 years. I'm in very good health. I have a extended family of many good people. In 3 generations. I'm still working to a certain extent with things I found very, very important. When I was 8 years ago, the president of the UN General Assembly, it was a time where we had the Sustainable Development Goals, also pointing very much towards less inequality, of course, but also climate and sustainability solutions. So yes, I have a good life with my family, and I have been earning pretty good income over the years, a good pension, but I also have important things that I'm still engaged in doing. So that's my definition of
Happiness.
happiness.
Yeah, I understand. Now, as a Nordic person, do you think the high ranking that the Nordic countries get year after year in this World Happiness Report and also in other happiness assessments and like tests or indexes, do you think this ranking is correct? Should the Nordic countries be the happiest in the world?
I think it's obvious that when the Nordic countries, maybe sometimes Denmark, sometimes Finland, sometimes Norway, rank number one in this index, it's because the factor we both mentioned, the social stability, the social coherence of the Nordic countries is still much higher than in very many other countries. Of course, more than America, more than Britain, more than Germany, where you had this so-called reforms in the late 90s that actually created a very low-paid group of workers and undermined the trade unions. By the way, the problem of the Danish and the Nordic model is also that the trade unions are weakened, that the organization is less than it used to be. And when you look at the history of the Nordic model, it has very much been the cooperation between a strong trade union movement gaining results in negotiations with the business community and social democratic-led governments supporting the equality in society by better public services and better public transfer income. And it is part of the explanation of a weakening of the Nordic models that in particular in Denmark and Sweden, social democratic parties and trade unions are much weaker than they used to be. I mean, you had 50 years ago, the Swedish Social Democratic Party could get 50% sometimes of the votes. Danish Social Democratic Party could get at least 40% in the best of elections when you go back as far. And now we have parties which is around a fourth of the electorate. Much weaker. We have trade unions that organize maybe up to 85% of the labor force, wage earners, and now down at 60, maybe even lower. So it's all factors that explains what's going on. And immigration also played a little role here, not a huge one as some people think, but a little role in creating a population less equipped to live up to the high minimum wages in international comparison. And that means more of those people on public support in one way or another. That has undermined some people's support for the social security system.
I understand. Now, let's talk about Danish people. I want to know how Danish people feel about money and fame. Do they think it's important in life to be rich and famous?
I think many people think that's important, yes. Not as much, not as visible, not as been showing richness as you see in America, for instance. That's not normal. You can have very anonymous billionaires around here in Denmark. They don't they're not going around showing their wealth in the same way people are doing in United States and other European countries also.
Do Danish women care a lot about a man's income and social status when they select their life partners for marriage?
Well, I think that is to a pretty high degree the case in each and every society. People that are more like in background, education, possibility to earn money, cultural traditions, tend to meet more often than those who are very different from. But I think there is another factor which is very visible in Denmark, namely that the most important revolution that happened within the last 50 years is that women went out to the labor market nearly at the same amount as men, not earning on average as much as men, but much, much more than they used to do, and much more equal than it used to be. And that has changed Danish society considerably. It has also been a combination with the building of the strong social services, very much manned up by women, actually, in health and education and childcare and so on. So there's been this extraordinary, historically seen, extraordinary strong movement of women's participation over at least the last 50 years. And that means that women are much more equipped to take care of themselves, not that dependent of having a rich husband. And we also see that a lot of younger women don't marry. They will have, of course, relations with men, but they will stay by themselves and not be dependent of a male partner's income.
Denmark has consecutively ranked first on the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index from 2018 to 2022. Why is Denmark such a clean country? Why is there no corruption in your country?
Yeah, it's. I think there's not only one explanation, but there is a very, even before democracy was introduced, we had a very non-corrupt bureaucracy. Public servants were non-corrupt, and the system is it's very transparent. It's very difficult to receive bribes and not be observed. But it's also in the mentality. You don't do that. Then you may try to evade taxes, yes, but you will not try to bribe public servants. It's very, very and public servants will not be leaning towards receiving any kind of that because strong, good traditions and good transparency, and it's also a political system was not being corrupt. It's very open, registered, that of course the center-right parties get some economic support from business life, and the center-left parties, especially the Social Democrats, get some support from the trade unions. And that's shown publicly. We know about it. And we've tried actually over the years to make that less important by increasing public tax-paid support for the political parties, which I think is a good idea to make political parties even less dependent on private sponsors and private interests.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And also, I talked to some of my friends in Finland. They also said the same thing as you said. They said, we actually want to be honest. And this is a transparent country. This is a clean country. And we don't want to get bribes from anyone. So that's what, and also our payments are quite good. So we can have a good and decent life in our country. So if that is the situation, if that's what we are getting from the state and from the government as citizens, why should we take bribes? Why should we take illegal and extra payments from people? So I think the Nordic model, this is the beauty of the Nordic model. When you understand one country, you actually have a general understanding of the other Nordic countries, because the culture and the system are more or less same and similar. So this is the next question. Why are Danes so honest, and why do they trust each other and their government so much? I think the social and institutional trust, this is one of the foundation stones of the Nordic model, that you people trust each other, the fellow citizens, and not only fellow citizens, you also trust your government and also the public institutions so much. The trust level is very high in the Nordic countries. So why is it that the Danes trust each other so much, and also the public institutions?
Yeah, I think among other factors, the fact that we know that most of the tax payment we make goes to the obvious necessary public services in health, education, and so on. It's not that there's a lot of slack where money moves out in dark ways to non-intended purposes. That we know. That's why the willingness to pay taxes is actually high. I think that there's even, in spite of the in international comparison, very high tax level, there is an acceptance for most people that if they could improve even further the quality of public services, they will be able to pay more tax. But it has also to do with the political system we have. There's no absolute power in Danish politics. There's no party even close to getting the majority of its own, and that makes the checks and balances much easier than in a country where the election system produces majority governments. We have right now a three-party coalition which has two mandate majority. Yes, that's very seldom. Normally we have minority, one party, two party, three party government. But anyway, there are very many different forces looking and checking each other in the Danish political system. And there is also a public trust in the fact that the parties work more together than in many other countries to produce results. It's not a confrontational system where you have a left-wing bloc or right-wing bloc and they don't talk to each other. Normally the parties on each side of the aisle will be involved in coalition, in agreements, even if they are part of a coalition for supporting the government. They will be involved in very many decisions also. So this non-confrontational system is part of the explanation. And minority multi-party system is part of the explanation that people have pretty high trust that nobody is taking unfair advantage of power.
If the Asian countries want to have a welfare model, a universal welfare model, providing social services to their citizens, like the Nordic countries, what should be their initial step? I know you cannot actually copy the Nordic welfare model and paste it somewhere else, so it's not possible. But actually, I guess you can take some steps to replicate some of the services that the Nordic welfare model is providing to your citizens. So as a politician, and as a Nordic person, What do you think the Asian countries should do if they want to implement or adopt this kind of welfare model?
Well, I think it's very, very difficult to find examples actually looking like the Nordic countries in Asia at all. You have maybe some elements in Singapore. You may also have some elements in Taiwan, actually, which is less a more equal society than many other Asian countries. But it takes the establishment and the willingness to maintain an effective taxation system if we want to take away the inequality connected with less equal access to health and education. Tax system is the first necessary factor. Also to try to get the rich people in very unequal societies pay for the rest. And that's a very difficult path to go, especially if you have a country with no coherence among groups, with big minorities, which the majority doesn't like. It will be a factor working against a uniform social security system. You can see that not only in poor countries, but you can see it in the United States of America. The reason of very low taxes and very low trust in public solutions in the United States has to do with racism also, because the rich people don't want to pay for the poor black people. So that makes it very, very difficult to get a majority for something like a Nordic model, also in the US.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's why the Nordic countries can actually sustain, and the Nordic citizens want to pay the taxes, because they know when they pay the taxes, they will get so many important services, social services in return. But if you want to have this kind of high taxation system in other countries where the inequality is very high, as you said, the majority people, maybe the rich people, they do not trust the poor, and it's also the vice versa. The poor, they don't trust the rich. So there is this problem of trust, and that's why the countries, the governments in those countries, they cannot actually implement this kind of universal welfare model, because the cohesion, the social cohesion among different groups is so low because of the low levels of trust. But in the Nordic countries, what you have managed to do is that you have established trust, high trust among different groups. And that's why they have all agreed that we will pay more taxes and we will get the services in return. So thank you, Mr. Mogens. Thank you for this wonderful discussion. I'm really glad that you agreed to be on my podcast, because, I have been promoting this Nordic thing for many years, and I'm always interested in talking about the Nordic countries. And I also have plans to go to Finland for masters. I want to go back to Finland, and if I have time, I will come to Denmark. And if you are free, then we can meet and we can talk more about the Nordic model and the Danish things and stuff like that.
With pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mogens. Okay. Thank you. Goodbye. Bye.